You may marry a good wife or a bad wife. Either way, you will regret it. Socrates. A statement like that might make you laugh, but also leave you with a lingering question. Why would one of the greatest minds in history speak so cynically about something as universally revered as marriage? Socrates, the philosopher who shaped the foundations of Western thought, was no stranger to paradoxes. He was a man who saw the complexities of life in their rawest form and believed that real wisdom came not from blind conformity, but from examining the truth of the human experience, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. And in his sharp, often biting perspective, he saw something that most of us fail to see today. Marriage is a battleground of power, not a sanctuary of love. When Socrates said, "You will regret marriage whether your wife is good or bad," he wasn't being bitter. He wasn't suggesting that all marriages are doomed to fail. He was offering a brutal truth about what happens when men step into relationships without fully understanding themselves. Marriage for him wasn't just a social contract, it was a test of the soul, and without the right mindset, the right awareness of one's own identity and autonomy, it could quickly become a cage. In this video, we will explore why Socrates had such a pessimistic view of marriage, and more importantly, why his advice to men still resonates today. Could it be that he understood the deeper psychological and emotional forces at play? Could it be that his perspective is actually a wake-up call to the modern man, urging him to enter marriage with not just love but wisdom? The truth might be unsettling, but it's a truth that can set you free. So let's dive in and see what Socrates knew about marriage and why he was right. Socrates, the great philosopher who gave the world the Socratic method, had many students and admirers. Yet despite his intellectual accomplishments, his personal life, particularly his marriage to Xanthippe, was far from idealized. In fact, it was often described as challenging, frustrating, and full of turmoil. Xanthippe, Socrates' wife, was notorious for her sharp tongue, her frequent temper, and her contentious nature. In the ancient writings, she is often portrayed as the archetype of the difficult wife, with Socrates himself being the long-suffering husband. The philosopher's life, however, provides a fascinating lens through which to understand his views on marriage relationships and the endurance of the human spirit. Many might expect Socrates, the man of reason, to have found peace and harmony at home, especially given his wisdom. But in reality, Socrates' marriage to Xanthippe was far from peaceful. According to historical accounts, Xanthippe's temperament was often abrasive, her criticisms sharp, and her demands unyielding. She would often berate Socrates for his indifference to household matters, his habit of neglecting his family in pursuit of intellectual pursuits, and his tendency to spend more time with his students than with her. And yet Socrates remained calm, showing remarkable patience with his wife's outbursts, never responding with anger or bitterness. Instead, he absorbed her criticisms with a kind of detached understanding. He famously said that the difficulty of living with Xanthippe was simply a test of his endurance, a challenge he had to face not because of her shortcomings, but because it was part of his philosophical practice, the test of endurance. For Socrates, marriage was an exercise in emotional resilience. His ability to endure the constant criticism and emotional storms from Xanthippe was in his mind a form of training, a way to practice self-control, patience, and the management of his own emotions. In the face of what could have been a volatile and emotionally draining situation, Socrates' calmness in response to his wife's behavior became a spiritual discipline, not just a passive acceptance. Socrates viewed the hardships in his marriage as an opportunity for growth. By not responding to Xanthippe's emotional outbursts with anger, he believed he could maintain his clarity of thought and emotional balance, which were crucial for his work as a philosopher. This idea reflects a deeper aspect of his philosophy, the importance of cultivating inner peace regardless of external circumstances. In this sense, his marriage to Xanthippe was not a hindrance to his philosophical pursuits, but an important arena for applying his ideas about patience, virtue, and self-discipline. He also used his marriage as a tool for understanding human nature. By facing the emotional turbulence of life with Xanthippe, Socrates was able to observe the intricacies of human behavior in a very personal and intimate context. He saw firsthand how emotional reactions, both his own and those of others, can shape our lives. His ability to endure Xanthipp's frustrations without retaliation revealed his capacity for emotional maturity and resilience, key qualities that allowed him to focus on his philosophical work. Lessons for men: marriage as inner training. What can we learn from Socrates' marriage to Xanthippe? At first glance, it might seem like an unflattering portrait of domestic life filled with conflict and discomfort. But upon deeper reflection, Socrates' experience offers several profound lessons for men today. Endurance over reaction. Socrates' response to Xanthippe's emotional outbursts was one of endurance. He didn't fight back, retaliate, or let her behavior derail his sense of self. Instead, he absorbed her words without allowing them to dictate his emotional state. For the modern man, this is a crucial lesson. In relationships, especially those that challenge you emotionally, endurance can be more powerful than reaction. Responding with anger or frustration only escalates the situation. True strength lies in the ability to remain calm, composed, and rational when faced with emotional chaos. Philosophical detachment. Socrates practiced what might be called philosophical detachment, the ability to separate yourself from emotional upheavals and remain grounded in your purpose. His commitment to logic and reason helped him navigate his difficult marriage without losing himself. Men today can learn from this practice of detachment, not in a way that denies emotions, but in a way that ensures those emotions don't take control of your life. It's about cultivating a mindset where you are guided by your principles and goals rather than by fleeting emotional reactions. Self-control as virtue. Socrates believed that self-control was one of the highest virtues. His marriage to Xanthippe was in a way an ongoing test of this virtue. Every time he chose not to engage in her emotional turbulence, he was exercising self-mastery. In relationships, men often find themselves caught up in emotional drama, trying to fix problems that might not be theirs to solve or reacting to situations that require patience instead of action. Learning to stay centered in yourself, regardless of external circumstances, allows you to approach relationships with clarity and strength, not with desperation or fear. Viewing marriage as a spiritual discipline. Socrates saw his marriage not as an obligation, but as a spiritual practice, an ongoing test of his personal growth. Modern men can benefit from viewing marriage in a similar light. Rather than seeing it as a final destination, marriage should be considered as an ongoing process of growth, challenge, and self-improvement. Each conflict, misunderstanding, or emotional challenge in marriage is an opportunity to deepen your understanding of yourself and your partner. It's a chance to practice patience, empathy, and emotional resilience. The spiritual value of a difficult marriage. Perhaps one of the most important lessons Socrates' marriage teaches us is the idea that true strength is not found in avoiding challenges, but in confronting them with grace and wisdom. Socrates was not a perfect man, nor was he a saint. He had his faults just like anyone else, but his willingness to face adversity, including the emotional turmoil of his marriage, and his ability to remain true to his philosophical principles, allowed him to live a life of purpose. In this sense, marriage can be seen as a training ground for men. It is an arena where they must practice emotional maturity, exercise self-discipline, and engage in constant self-reflection. If a man can maintain his integrity and sense of self in the face of the challenges that marriage presents, he becomes stronger, not just in his relationship, but in his overall life. Socrates' experience with Xanthippe challenges the notion that marriage is a source of comfort and safety. Instead, it invites us to reconsider marriage as a space for personal evolution. It's a place where men can sharpen their emotional intelligence, enhance their resilience, and develop the kind of self-control that ultimately leads to greater wisdom. Socrates, the master of dialogue and the philosopher who dedicated his life to questioning everything, had a deeply pragmatic and cautionary approach to marriage. His thoughts on the institution weren't based on disdain or criticism of women, but rather on a profound understanding of human nature, emotions, and how easily men can lose themselves in the emotional chaos of relationships. Socrates didn't shy away from the fact that marriage could be challenging and potentially destructive for men, especially when they were not properly equipped to understand the psychological forces at play. His wisdom went beyond traditional views, offering a keen insight into the emotional dynamics that could overwhelm a man's life if he was not prepared. At the heart of Socrates' warnings was a fundamental truth. Marriage, when entered into without self-awareness and reason, becomes a trap, one that can engulf a man's mind, emotions, and soul. His philosophy was rooted in the belief that men must always be in control of themselves and that reason and logic must guide their actions, not emotion, not impulse, and certainly not the unconscious dynamics of their partner's emotional world. 1. Marriage and the emotional struggle. Socrates saw marriage as a battlefield of emotional forces. In his view, the emotional turbulence that could be present in a marital relationship had the potential to consume the man's reason and lead him away from his path of virtue. This emotional storm is often unpredictable, driven by a mix of hormones, childhood influences, personal insecurities, and unconscious needs, particularly those of the woman. For Socrates, the male ability to stay grounded in reason was the ultimate safeguard against this emotional chaos. When a man doesn't understand his own emotional reactions, or when he allows his partner's emotions to control his behavior, he loses the ability to lead himself, let alone a relationship. He famously stated that marriage is a reflection of one's own inner balance and self-awareness. This was no simple statement about the social or legal aspects of marriage. Socrates was warning that a man who enters marriage without clarity about his own inner world is inviting chaos into his life. He will be swayed by whatever emotional storm his partner brings, whether it's anger, sadness, passion, or frustration, making him more reactive and less proactive in the relationship. 2. The risk of losing selfhood. What Socrates feared most about marriage wasn't the institution itself, but the danger of self-sacrifice that comes with it. The man who marries Socrates believed must do so with awareness of his own identity and with a clear understanding of his personal values. Otherwise, he risks becoming a passive player in his own life. In a relationship where emotions are allowed to dictate actions, a man often subordinates his desires and ambitions to his partner's needs, thinking it's a form of love or devotion. Socrates, however, saw this as a form of enslavement. Men often enter relationships with the idea that they should be providers, protectors, and nurturers, as these are the roles expected by society. But Socrates warned that when men fully internalize these roles without grounding them in their own sense of self, they end up losing their individuality and becoming mere servants to emotional demands. Over time, they may feel trapped in a cycle of emotional subjugation where their desires, ambitions, and freedom are put on hold indefinitely in favor of meeting the needs of others. 3. The emotional power imbalance. One of the most profound warnings Socrates gave was about the dangerous power imbalance that could arise in a marriage when a man does not understand the emotional dynamics at play. In many relationships, especially those driven by emotional manipulation or unspoken expectations, the woman can hold an unconscious emotional power over the man, one that he may not even recognize until it's too late. This emotional power does not stem from aggression or dominance, but from subtle, often invisible forces, the use of emotional withdrawal, guilt, and affection as leverage. The woman's emotions can easily create an emotional debt that the man feels compelled to pay. This emotional imbalance can lead to unhealthy dependency, where the man becomes unable to make decisions without considering how they will affect his partner's emotional state. Socrates' insight into this power dynamic is striking. He recognized that emotional dependency weakens the individual, not just the relationship. A man who constantly seeks to please his partner emotionally, while ignoring his own emotional needs, gradually loses his ability to stand firm in his own values and principles. He becomes reactive, adjusting his behavior not according to his own desires or beliefs, but to his partner's ever-changing emotional needs. 4. The importance of self-understanding and control. Socrates warned that a man must understand himself before he could understand and manage his relationships. Without a clear sense of identity and emotional self-control, he risks being swayed by every emotional current in the relationship. This is where Socratic wisdom becomes powerful. Self-awareness and reason are the antidotes to the emotional manipulation and chaos that often arise in relationships. Socrates believed that a man must be fully conscious of his own desires, goals, and emotional triggers. Only when a man understands his own inner workings can he engage in relationships as a conscious, autonomous individual. Socrates' focus on reason was not about being unemotional or detached. It was about being in control of one's emotions rather than being controlled by them. In marriage, this means being able to approach emotional challenges with clarity and calmness. It means responding, not reacting. 5. Marriage as a test of character. For Socrates, marriage wasn't just a test of compatibility, but a test of character. It was an opportunity for men to practice virtue, to develop patience, self-discipline, emotional intelligence, and the ability to stay true to one's values, even in the face of emotional chaos. But it is only when a man understands his own inner world that he can truly navigate the complexities of marriage with wisdom. If a man enters marriage with an open heart, but a closed mind, believing that love alone will solve all problems, he is in danger of being consumed by the emotional forces of the relationship. Socrates didn't view marriage as something to avoid or dismiss. It was simply a test of self-mastery. The man who understands himself and can maintain emotional clarity in the face of his partner's emotional turbulence is the one who can truly thrive in marriage. 6. The bottom line. Socratic wisdom in marriage. Ultimately, Socrates saw marriage as a reflection of a man's internal state. If a man cannot master his own emotional world, he cannot hope to navigate the emotional intricacies of a marriage. It is not about avoiding the complexities of relationships. It is about facing them with clarity, maintaining a steady course, and understanding that the true test is not in the partnership, but in the self. Socrates' wisdom still rings true today. Know yourself. Understand your desires. Cultivate emotional control. Only then can a man enter marriage not as a passive recipient of his partner's emotional fluctuations, but as a conscious, empowered individual who brings his full self into the relationship. The ultimate message from Socrates is clear. If you do not understand yourself, you will be consumed by the emotional dynamics of marriage. It is not the institution that's flawed, but the man who enters it without awareness. Wisdom, not love, must lead the way. The institution of marriage today looks vastly different than it did in Socrates' time. The world is more open, more democratic, and on the surface, more equal. Yet beneath the social changes and cultural shifts, the power dynamics within marriage remain eerily similar. In fact, marriage today can still feel like a trap, only now the trap is legally sanctioned and emotionally charged. Socrates' warning about marriage being a test of self-control and awareness still rings true even in the modern world. But the challenge has evolved. Today, men are not only contending with the emotional volatility of their partners, but also with the legal and societal structures that enforce the roles of provider, protector, and emotional anchor in a relationship. Marriage has transformed from a simple social contract into something more complex, a legalized system of power where men are still often expected to sacrifice their freedom, identity, and autonomy for the sake of the union. The unseen pressure, social expectations, and gender roles. In today's world, men are still expected to play the role of the provider, both financially and emotionally. Society's script for marriage hasn't changed much from Aristotle's time. Men are conditioned to think they must provide stability, wealth, and support, while women are often expected to care for the emotional and domestic needs of the family. What makes this pressure particularly difficult for modern men is that it is invisible. In many cases, it's not a direct demand from their wives, it's a cultural expectation they have absorbed through years of conditioning. The subtle belief that a man's worth is tied to his ability to provide and protect means that many men step into marriage thinking they are living up to their responsibilities, but in reality, they are slowly losing their sense of self. When these expectations are combined with the emotional volatility of the relationship, the result is a loss of autonomy. Men often find themselves caught in a web of giving without receiving emotionally, financially, and psychologically. The more they give, the less they feel they can ask for in return. The more they sacrifice, the less they recognize themselves in the process. Marriage as a legalized contract of emotional dependence. While Socrates warned of emotional manipulation in marriage, today's marriage is also a contract in a more literal sense. In many countries, marriage carries legal obligations, responsibilities that tie the partners to each other financially and emotionally for life. Once a man enters this contract, his emotional well-being and financial future are often entwined with the whims of his partner. The law has institutionalized the idea of emotional dependence and in some cases emotional control. Divorce laws often favor women in terms of custody and financial support. And while there is no malice in this, it can create an environment where men feel trapped, unable to leave a relationship without risking substantial emotional and financial damage. Even in relationships where both partners share responsibilities equally, the underlying societal expectation for men to bear the financial burden still looms large. Men are still taught to be the primary providers. This is not just a personal choice, but a cultural mandate. And when this mandate is coupled with the emotional manipulation that Freud described, men find themselves in a delicate balance, emotionally drained and financially strained, often with nowhere to turn. Marriage today then is not simply an emotional bond, but a structured and legalized exchange of power. It is a partnership, yes, but one in which the man's emotional and financial freedom is often compromised by his role as the provider. He may have legal rights, but often at the expense of his personal autonomy. The erosion of masculine autonomy. One of the most subtle and dangerous consequences of this legalized trap is the erosion of masculine autonomy. Men in marriages often find themselves living under constant pressure to meet external expectations, not just from their wives, but from society, family, and friends. These external pressures build up over time and can have a devastating effect on the man's sense of self. This is where Socrates' insights into self-awareness come into play. In his time, men had to rely on their rational faculties to stay grounded and avoid being swept away by the emotional currents of their relationships. But in today's world, rationality is still key, yet it is more difficult than ever to stay emotionally autonomous when the world around you continuously pulls you in. The man who does not engage in active self-reflection, who does not develop emotional independence, will find himself caught in a cycle of self-sacrifice, giving away pieces of his identity to meet the needs of the marriage. And while this may seem noble or loving in the short term, over time, it becomes a path of emotional numbness where the man forgets who he is or what he truly desires. He begins to function as a mechanism for his partner's happiness, rather than as an equal participant in the relationship. A shift in relationship dynamics. Finding balance. If men are to escape the trap of marriage as a legalized power struggle, they must first reclaim their autonomy. This is not an easy task, especially given the cultural expectations that exist around masculinity and marriage. But the key to creating a balanced, healthy relationship is recognizing the unconscious dynamics at play, both within oneself and within the relationship. The first step in reclaiming autonomy is to develop a sense of emotional independence. This means recognizing that your emotions, thoughts, and actions should not be dictated by your partner's moods or emotional needs. You must define your own emotional landscape and understand how to cultivate peace within yourself independent of her emotional state. The second step is to set boundaries. Boundaries are the pillars that keep the emotional and psychological balance in a relationship intact. Men must learn to say no, to ask for what they need, and to ensure that they don't lose their identity in the pursuit of keeping the peace. Lastly, men must understand their value, not through the eyes of their partner, but through their own eyes. This involves cultivating a strong sense of self-worth that is not contingent on external approval or validation. The man who values himself is the one who can enter marriage not to be completed, but to share and grow alongside a partner. The final takeaway: reclaiming freedom in marriage. Socrates' view of marriage as a battleground of emotions and power struggles is as relevant today as it was in ancient Athens. In modern society, the power dynamics within marriage are not always as visible or as easily understood. Yet, like in ancient Greece, men are still susceptible to the unconscious emotional forces at play in their relationships. However, the modern man can avoid the trap of emotional control and manipulation by awakening to these dynamics and developing a strong sense of self and emotional independence. By understanding the power struggles inherent in marriage, men can reclaim their autonomy, set boundaries, and build relationships based on mutual respect, understanding, and equality. Marriage need not be a prison. It can be a partnership in which both individuals thrive. But that thriving can only happen when both partners are allowed to be themselves, free from the weight of unconscious emotional control. The man who understands the dynamics of power in marriage can step into it with eyes wide open, fully aware of both the challenges and the opportunities for growth. Marriage, when entered into consciously and with a deep understanding of oneself, can be one of the most profound and fulfilling experiences a man can have. However, as Socrates warned, without the right mindset, the institution of marriage can quickly become a power struggle, one where the man risks losing himself emotionally and psychologically. The key to surviving marriage without sacrificing your identity is self-awareness, boundary setting, and emotional resilience. Here's how men can navigate this challenge and build a relationship that strengthens their autonomy rather than diminishing it. 1. Understand yourself before entering the relationship. The first and most crucial step for any man is to know himself. Socrates famously said, "Know thyself," and this advice is essential when it comes to entering a relationship. Men must understand their emotional triggers, their desires, their needs, and their vulnerabilities before committing to someone else. The more you understand yourself, the less likely you are to fall victim to unconscious emotional manipulation. Knowing yourself means understanding what you want in a relationship, what you need emotionally, and what you will not tolerate. This self-awareness acts as a mental foundation that helps you make clear decisions when emotions cloud judgment. Self-reflection is essential. Take the time to understand your values, your purpose in life, and how a potential partner fits into that. When you understand who you are and what you stand for, you are no longer a passive participant in a relationship. You are an active, empowered individual who can contribute to the relationship without losing sight of your own identity. This clarity helps you avoid the trap of emotional dependency, where the relationship defines you rather than you defining the relationship. 2. Set boundaries and communicate clearly. Boundaries are the bedrock of any healthy relationship. Without clear boundaries, a man risks losing himself in the emotional demands of his partner. Many men fall into the trap of constantly pleasing their partners, thinking that to maintain peace or affection, they must suppress their own needs. This is a dangerous mindset, as it leads to resentment, frustration, and emotional burnout. Setting boundaries isn't just about saying no to unwanted behaviors. It's about clearly communicating your needs and expectations. Boundaries define what you are willing to accept and what you will not tolerate in a relationship. They provide emotional space to ensure that you don't lose yourself in the relationship. For example, if you need time to pursue personal interests, hobbies, or spend time with friends, set that expectation early. Let your partner know that your individual growth is a priority and that time apart is not a sign of disconnection, but of mutual respect for each other's autonomy. Aristotle emphasized that true love is about finding balance, and boundaries are a vital part of maintaining that balance. In a relationship, both partners must maintain their independence even while supporting each other. If your partner's emotional needs begin to overshadow your own, it's time to set boundaries and reassert your emotional and psychological space. 3. Don't lose yourself in the relationship. Many men, especially those with deep emotional connections, find themselves sacrificing their own needs for the sake of the relationship. They might abandon hobbies, friendships, or career goals to focus entirely on their partner. While it's natural to want to prioritize your partner's happiness, it's important to understand that a relationship should not consume your entire existence. Socrates warned that marriage is an emotional test of endurance, but this doesn't mean it should be endured at the cost of personal fulfillment. The key to survival is learning to thrive within the relationship, not just survive. It's essential that both partners maintain their personal passions, friendships, and individual pursuits. One way to ensure you don't lose yourself is to maintain a strong sense of personal purpose outside of the relationship. Whether it's a career, a creative project, or something as simple as personal health and fitness, having goals and passions that are separate from the relationship allows you to stay emotionally grounded and maintain your identity. A man who has no personal fulfillment outside of the relationship becomes emotionally dependent on the woman for validation and support. This dependency creates unnecessary power imbalances in the relationship and puts undue pressure on the woman to fulfill all of his emotional needs. 4. Use rationality to navigate emotional storms. Emotions in relationships are inevitable, but it's how you handle them that determines whether you lose your identity or not. Socrates believed that virtue comes from the ability to regulate one's emotions and actions. This means that while you should feel and empathize with your partner's emotions, you must also be able to step back and use reason to guide your actions. When you find yourself in a heated argument or emotional conflict, take a moment to pause and assess the situation. Emotions can cloud judgment, and when we act on impulse, we often say things we don't mean or do things we later regret. Learning to pause and allow your rational mind to take control in these situations helps you to respond rather than react. Using reason doesn't mean being cold or distant. It means maintaining clarity of thought and emotional stability in the face of emotional turmoil. When you lead with reason, you can approach relationship challenges with perspective rather than being swept away by the immediate emotional current. 5. Develop emotional independence and inner strength. True emotional independence means not relying on anyone to validate your worth or dictate your emotional state. While relationships are based on mutual care and support, your sense of happiness and security should never be dependent on your partner's emotional state. One way to develop emotional independence is to engage in self-care practices that strengthen your emotional resilience. Meditation, journaling, physical exercise, and pursuing your passions are all activities that help you maintain emotional balance. The stronger your emotional foundation, the less likely you are to be manipulated or overly influenced by your partner's moods or behavior. Freud also emphasized the importance of self-reflection in understanding emotional needs. He believed that understanding your unconscious desires and fears would allow you to take control of your emotional reactions rather than be driven by them. When you understand your emotional triggers and patterns, you become less reactive and more in control of your emotional responses. 6. Build relationships based on mutual respect and equality. The most sustainable relationships are built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared values. Both partners should enter the relationship not as two halves of a whole, but as two complete individuals. Socrates' philosophy would argue that relationships are strongest when both individuals maintain their independence while supporting each other's growth. Building a relationship based on equality means that both partners contribute equally to the emotional and psychological health of the relationship. Each partner brings something unique to the table, and both should have equal input into the direction of the relationship. This type of dynamic prevents one partner from taking control over the other. Additionally, trust and honesty are the cornerstones of equality. When both partners feel safe to express their needs, frustrations, and desires, they create a foundation for mutual understanding and cohesion. Relationships thrive when both individuals feel heard, valued, and respected.